Hello and welcome to ASG. Today we're going to talk about narrowband processing our images. Narrowband is the process, of course, of using narrowband filters such as hydrogen alpha, oxygen, sulfur. You're taking a very thin bandpass of light and then you're applying it to imagery. And so we're going to take a look at how some of these get processed in Photoshop. We've talked about previously, just to recap how we got here, we've taken our images and we've stacked them in AstroPixel Processor. You can also use Deep Sky Stacker, but that takes your, however many images you have to begin with, 300, 500, 20, and you stack your images. Put all your hydrogen together, put all your sulfur together, put all your oxygen together. And what we do is we want to combine those into an RGB image. And I don't want you to confuse RGB images with SHO and HSO images, because what we're doing is we're assigning those specific narrowband images to a color channel. So in the end, it doesn't end up looking like what you would see visually. Of course, we can't see any of this visually, but we're trying to see with narrowband the contrast difference between our narrowband channels. And Hubble, for example, became very popular when it came out with its Hubble color palette of assigning certain channels to certain gases. For example, sulfur they put into the red channel, which is very red. Hydrogen they put into the green channel. Of course, hydrogen is bright red as well, and so it's not green. But we have to assign it to something to get it into our monitors and for our visual use. And then oxygen is very green blue, and they assign that to just the blue channel. So it's just a matter of where you want to put those to get the best contrast for your image. The Hubble images, for example, don't look like that, but it did represent a very good contrast in a way for you to scientifically even look at an image and say that is very hydrogen rich, or that's a very oxygen rich area, and so that's why they use it. One thing, and that's one thing I always look at, is there's really no right or wrong way to assign your narrowband images to channels in your image. In this example, we're going to actually apply the Hubble color palette because I think it shows the great contrast there versus, say, an RGB image or applying them to a HSO or HOO palette. So let's take a look at what we have here. Again, this is combined in AstroPixel Processor, and then it's simply stretched in AstroPixel Processor to 10%. So this is kind of the raw fit. You can see it's still not cropped or anything. You can see some of the channels showing up underneath here. And then we take this and we're going to first off remove stars. That's always the first thing I do because I like to work with the nebula separate from the stars. And it doesn't matter if I'm working in RGB, HSO, HOO. I just want to get rid of the stars so that I don't touch them and hurt them, essentially, as I start to bring out the colors and contrasts in the nebula. So let's take a look at that. First, it would come across looking like this, and we can go over to channels, and this is where we have red, green, and blue. Now, AstroPixel Processor has a way to combine those, and it puts sulfur into red, hydrogen into green, and oxygen into blue. Or you can actually use Deep Sky Stacker, and you can actually take your black and white images of these and just copy them here in Photoshop into these channels, and you end up with the same effect. You're just trying to get it split and put into and assign them to the correct channel. And you can see here that green, of course, that is your hydrogen. That's always typically going to be your clearest, your cleanest image. You're going to have more signal there. If we look at red, this is sulfur. And if we go to our oxygen, it's typically going to be the worst signal you get. It just gets a lot of light pollution in this area too. So, let's take a look now at how we can go to the next step, which is removing stars. And I talked about StarNet. I've used StarNet, which is a DOS-based system, a lot. There's also a great plugin out there called RC Astro, and it's called Star Exterminator. And I've been using that more and more just because it's now built into Photoshop. And so if you just have this image, you can hit Control Alt Shift, and you can hit N for new, and just keep holding down Control Alt Shift, and you hit E, and it's going to paste an actual duplicate of whatever you see on your screen. And that's a really popular shortcut. Control Alt Shift N, and just hold it down and hit E again, and then you've got a nice duplicate. So what you need is these two layers exactly the same, and then on this top layer you can just go to Filters, RC Astro, and run Star Exterminator, and it will just go ahead and start removing stars. Now it usually only takes about 5 minutes. I've already done it here, and when you're finished, what you'll end up with is an image on a layer that looks just like this. And so let me throw away my other two layers, and we'll just get these two out since I'm already there. And you can see this top one is exact same thing, just the stars removed, and it did a really good job of processing that. You will see a few artifacts underneath bright stars, and we'll talk about how to get rid of those now. So what I like to do is an old Photoshop trick. This has been used around for a long time, is to do a subtract. So we're going to subtract this image from this image, and what we should be left with is just the stars. So we're going to go up here to let me see, oh no, we're going to pull down here. This is our layer manipulation panel, and so I can do all kinds of things with this, including subtract. Okay, and now what we have is just the stars, nothing else. And because I'm looking at it, I can just hit Control Alt Shift N and E, and we get a duplicate layer of what we see. So there's my layer now with stars, and here is my layer being subtracted. So I'm going to turn my layer back to normal for my nebula, and my stars, you can see, are overlaying it. I can't see anything, and that's because we just have to turn this into a linear dodge, and it's going to basically remove all the black. And now we have stars on one layer, and we have nebula on a layer underneath. Okay, and we can rename these. We'll call it nebula for this one, and stars on this one. Okay, and then I like to turn my stars off, and now we're going to go ahead and I can manipulate my nebula here and all this color without ever affecting and stretching or destroying my original stars. And again, this would be the same thing with StarNet as well. So let's take a look at the nebula, and I like to flip over to channels now, and I like to clean up my channels. I prefer to do them individually rather than over here on the layer with RGB, because you have a lot more control. If I'm on my nebula layer and I go to channels, you can see as I flip through these channels, I get artifacts, and you can see the stars really show up here on my blue image. And so let's go through and touch these up. And in Photoshop, we're going to be, manipulating the data here to make it look better. We're going to try to enhance it a little bit. And so, this is kind of that point where you have to decide how far to go. What are you okay with? So I'm going to take a layer here, and I just hit Control A, and I'm going to copy it. And I'm just going to create a new document, and I'm just going to paste it. And this is going to be grayscale, and I want to change this image now to go mode in RGB color, and I want to go image mode in 16-bit channel. And that's going to unlock a bunch of features that we have here. Okay, so now I've just got a layer with just my oxygen, and I'm going to touch up and get rid of some of these little artifacts here. And so for that I use this healing brush. And you can use the bracket tool on your keyboard to increase and decrease your brush size. And I like to just get around my stars like this, click on them, and you can see they just clean up that space a little bit. I want to be careful that I'm not getting in here and like destroying a bunch of nebula. You know, if you come in here and you try to do it like on one of these really nice objects, you can see it just totally destroyed it. I don't want to do that. I don't want to really manipulate that data, but I know these stars are halos out here, and I'm going to go ahead and get some of these things. And you can increase and decrease your brush size and kind of click around and quickly get rid of some of these artifacts. Some of these I got to be really careful. I mean, some of these may be actual signal. I'm going to zoom in and out and kind of see if they're stars or not. And you can do whatever you feel comfortable with on this. You can move around and try to smooth it out a little bit. And most of these I know are just out in the dark areas. I'm not playing inside the nebula very much. And you can go to however length you want. I'm going to go ahead and stop there just for an example. And now what I like to do is I like to try to get rid of, you can see all this noise. I can try to enhance the coloring here and try to bring it out per channel. I think it does a better effect. So I'm going to come up here to Filter and Camera Raw. And now we're going to do some stretching on it. So we're going to bring light colors forward. We're going to enhance that. We're going to get rid of some of the speckling and noise. And this is only on this channel. So I'd like to go to the basics. Camera Raw is a really powerful tool. And I like to go down through these basics and just barely touch them up. For example, contrast. You know, you can really slide it back and forth and see the difference. And this is where you can get carried away, of course, with everything. You can see up here on your chart, you know, you don't want to get in here and clip out all of this signal, you know, and you can go way too far and get into some of these little faint objects in here. So I might want to adjust contrast just a little bit. Highlights, that's going to be your real bright whites. You know, you don't want to go too far with it, but I'm going to bring them up just a little bit. Your shadows. Okay, and I like to sometimes bring them light, sometimes I like to make them a little darker. You can see what it's doing up here to your actual curve. Whites is going to bring out all whites. Of course, you can blow it out, and you can see up there on your histogram what's happening. You're basically clipping all that signal. Okay, but we want to add just a little bit, kind of enhance it. At any time, if you want to see what you're doing, you can come down here in Camera Raw and you can see the before and after. And you can see that's a noticeable nice difference at bringing out the color a little bit there. When we jump into clarity, you can also zoom in like this, which is really nice. Clarity is going to make your whites whiter and your darks darker. It's going to try to essentially really clear that image, and you can see all these bad artifacts showing up out here, so that's just way too much. We might want to take it off, and you can see that just gets way washed out. So we'll add a little bit of clarity here, just little tiny amounts is really good to do. Dehazing, same thing. Okay, just too much in both directions. So you just kind of do what you feel happy with here. And we'll go ahead and look at the before and after. And I think that's a noticeable difference. It just brings out the signal a little bit more. I do have a lot of noise out here, and I can keep playing with it to clean that up. So to get rid of noise, you want to be careful with noise because you can start to ruin your signal. And it's nice to do it at the end, but I also like to do it here at the beginning because I can get it early and I can get it on the raw channels. And I don't like to do a lot of it, but I like to do just a little bit, and you can see you can really just flatten out those, but then they start to look kind of plasticky and I don't know, kind of odd looking. It takes the texture away from it. And if you do it and zoom out and look at it, you might say, well, that looks really nice, it's super smooth, but it looks kind of fake looking, almost like watercolored in that point. So I like to do just a little bit of noise and get rid of some of the big heavy stuff, but not so much that I ruin the image. Okay, so that's a before, that's an after. I think we've improved that. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control A and Control C, and so I'm just selecting all, and I'm going to hit copy this whole entire image. And we'll jump back over here, and I'm going to go to my channels. Again, that we've just been working on the blue channel, and you can see all of these original artifacts on here. And all you have to do now is we've copied it, we're just going to paste it, and you can see all that goes away into your blue channel. Okay. And so I'll do that for all three of these. I'll come in here, I'll grab my, this is my hydrogen channel. So I'm going to hit Control A, Control C, and copy it. Just jump over here to my other image, and I can just paste this right on top of this layer. And so now I can manipulate my hydrogen layer. You can see this is usually a really clean signal. You can zoom in. Notice there's hardly anything compared to noise on my blue channel. Big difference. Okay. In fact, I don't have hardly any of the artifacts from stars. I'm actually pretty happy with that. I mean, it looks really nice, and I know I'm not touching it much. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to go ahead and go to Camera Raw. I really like some of this, light detail out here. I think that looks great. So we're gonna just gingerly start curving this thing. So I'm going to go into contrast. Again, if you go too deep, you're going to remove some of these real faint features out here. So do it sparingly. Okay, I'm going to make my highlights get a little brighter. That brings out the core a little bit. My shadows. Okay. My whites, that's going to be all the whites everywhere. Bring it out just a little bit. Clarity. That'll bring the difference between the two. You can see clarity can go really strong on this, and it probably will look okay because it doesn't have a lot of noise in it. You can really see some of these dark areas coming out, but I'm not going to do too much. I don't want to destroy the image. You can dehaze it to whatever you like. Okay. Another key thing to look at is this background, this dark area. You don't want one image to be completely black like this and another one to be really bright gray like this. You want to try to get them all fairly similar in terms of their background color. Okay. And we can look at before and after. I think that's an improvement. Okay. And we can do the same thing. We can go to detail, but there's not a lot of noise, but we can remove just a little bit. Doesn't take much. We're not affecting too much here, but it will help. Okay. Now the basics, just to give you an idea of what we're doing, we're moving these curves. That's the exact same thing you would do in PixInsight when you grab these curves and you're bending them and you're that's exactly what we're doing here. We're just doing them with sliders. So when you take your highlights, for example, you're just bending this upper portion. When you're doing your darks, you're messing with just this lower section. So it's the same thing as PixInsight. It's the same thing as doing it with curves. The basic area in Camera Raw is just with sliders. So I enjoy that feature on it. Just depends on how you like to work. Okay, so there's before and after. Let's just go ahead and go with this. Again, you could spend forever on these. I'm going to copy this, so Control A, Control C, and I copy it. And I'm going to come back over here to my green, and I'm just going to paste it. And you can see it jump in there. Let's do our red real quick. So this is our sulfur. I'm going to jump over here and paste in my sulfur, and so now we're working with just that. Let's look for, there's a few star artifacts here, so maybe I'll come in here with the little healing brush again and get rid of a couple of them. If you see some really big ones, you can, and whatever you feel comfortable doing. It doesn't look too bad for the most part. You can see some of these circle things really stand out once in a while. This rosette, it's just the brightest target in the sky. You can't go wrong with it. It's got so much signal on every channel, so it makes a good one for tutorial purposes. So, okay, we've got touched up. We'll do Camera Raw to this one too. And I'll go to Basics, and I'll give it a little bit of contrast. I'll bump the highlights up. It's pretty dark. I'm going to make it just a little bit lighter. Bring out the whites. Even the blacks I'll bring up just a little bit. Give it a little bit of texture. Just a little bit. We'll look at before and after here. It definitely helps to bring that up. Okay. And this does have quite a bit of noise in it. You can see that when you zoom in. There's lots of ways to do noise. This is the built-in one for Photoshop. You can do noise. I know a lot of people like Topaz denoise. I've used it a lot. I like it. It can inject a few artifacts here and there, thinking something needs to be brighter, but for artwork, it works okay. I'm going to go ahead and give it just a little bit of noise here. I don't want to wash out all this really cool nebula in here, so I'm going to be okay with some noise actually. I'm going to just let her go. So there's a before, there's an after. I think I brought that signal out quite a bit. For the tutorial here, we'll go ahead and just hit Control A, Control C. We'll jump back over, and this is going to get pasted into our red channel. Okay, so let's turn on all of the light bulbs here and all of the eyeballs, and we can see the image. You can really see a difference. This is our before, of course, with the stars. Let me turn the stars on. Okay, so we've done quite a bit there with that nebula, making it look a little better. We can zoom in here. Looks really nice, pretty smooth. We've got rid of that noise on each channel specifically. There's not a lot of noise out here. Okay, so I think we're doing a pretty good job at this point. Now, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to crop this, so we're just not messing with all this outside stuff. So we'll just grab the crop tool. You can see some of these are really cut. So I might rotate this image and try to line it up a little bit better so I can do less cropping of the good stuff. And I'll have to come into there to get rid of this one panel. Not real good framing when I took this. Okay, so I think that's got it all in there. Hit enter. Crop it out. Okay. where we're at. Okay, so let's do this. I've got just my nebula showing. I kind of like what I've done. I'm going to hit Control Alt Shift N and E, and that's going to give me a new layer and put whatever's on my screen on the new layer. So now I've got a duplicate. This is kind of a nice workflow because you then can kind of move on to the next stage without ruining the other one. If I ever want to go back, I can just remove that layer and I can start over again. So I'm on this new nebula. Next thing I'm going to do is look at background color. So we want this to be sort of balanced, and when we say balanced, what we mean is, I'm going to jump over here, we want all of our channels to appear, let me show my colors up here in the channel panel. We want them to be all fairly similar in color, and we want our background to be fairly balanced, and what we mean there is we want a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, a little bit of green. It's black, so they should kind of line up number wise, and you can do that by coming over here and selecting your color sampler tool, and you simply move around, and you'll notice over here in my info panel we've got RGB. Okay, and this is an 8-bit, but we're going to just move this around, and you'll notice those numbers change. We're getting different values for red, green, and blue. And so I'm going to try to find a spot where I think it's really dark in my image, or where it should be dark. And as I move around, I'm going to basically look for some of the lowest values I can find. Okay. Let's just drop a point. Maybe I'll do a couple. And I'll do another one here. That'll give us an idea across the whole image. Okay, so if we look at these numbers, number 1 and number 2, 22, 19, 33, or 33, 19, 26, they're all pretty consistent that green is the lower value. So what we're going to do is essentially slide red down and blue down so they get a little bit closer. This is adjusting levels, and you might hear people talk about levels quite a bit. All you have to do is, you're on your nebula layer, we'll hit Control L. Okay, and this brings up your level panel, and you can see the histogram here, and you can chop the levels on RGB or red or green or blue. And what we want to do is pick the high ones, and we're going to slide this left side down, and you'll see those values start to drop. Okay, so now it's 19, 19, 29, 19. What we're doing is we're balancing the black on our image. Okay, and I can't get them exact, that's fine. Just kind of get them a little bit closer. I also want to do the blue. I want to bring it down just a little bit. And you can watch the image too, see where you like it. You can see this one's still 26, it's a little high, but over here on this one it's a little bit closer to the green. So we're getting a little bit more balanced, and you can see that in your image a lot. Another way to do this, and I like to balance it too, really to my liking, I'm going to create another layer, Control Alt Shift N plus E. And I'm going to do this now in Camera Raw with all 3 layers going. So now I'm in full RGB mode. I'll just go Camera Raw. And you can do a lot of twisting in here of your curves. And so for example, temperature, I can change and really bring out the blues. And you can see my histogram up here. You know, I'm just really pushing that blue way out. Obviously not realistic, but if I go the other way, I'm going way more yellow and removing it. And so this is a great tool to kind of slide that around. I tend to like my images just a little bit more blue. It brings out the blue core. And then on the tint, between the green and reds, you know, I like to slide them just a little bit over. You can see it really starts to bring out that color. Okay, and I'll show you before. There's a lot of green in there. Now it's much more neutralized, to my liking anyway. And we can go down through this as well. We can also adjust the contrast a little bit. You can see it really brings out blacks. Maybe we'll want to give the highlights a little brighter. Okay, the darks. I like to not ruin the darks by pushing these all the way to black, like that. I like to leave them actually a little bit more gray. And so I like to bring them up a little bit, and you'll see all this faint stuff really kind of coming out in that. Whites I'll bring just a little bit brighter. You can see you can go too much and really blow it out, but you want to bring it out so you can see it. That's the point. Clarity, again, that's going to really push the white and blacks and opposites. And you might like tons of clarity, you might not like that much clarity. That's a little bit much for me. But I'll bring out a little bit. I think it looks good. It's a pretty cool tool. Texture, you'll see that's just like it comes into focus. Texture is really adding noise. If you zoom in here, you can really see it come out. But it's one thing I like about Photoshop is I like to play with it. I don't like running scripts on my images that much. Okay, so let's see before and after. Pretty green. Much more blues in here, much more kind of peachy tone. This is really what people see with the Hubble color palette. I think that's why they like it so much. You know, and this really brings out the colors. You can see the hydrogen regions in here versus the oxygen, which is the very blue sections. The sulfur tends to turn this really dark kind of peachy skin color, which people really like. It really just shows that contrast of depth, and that's what you're trying to do. I mean, that's what narrowband is. It's showing a couple of real narrowband passes and trying to show the different tones between the two. You can also come in here to detail. We can, you know, adjust a little bit of noise reduction. This really doesn't have a ton. There's a lot of other things you can do in here. You can mess around with calibrating your colors. You can go into actual color mixing, and you can take your hues and you can really start, you know, sliding things around, picking up little tiny areas in there that you want to adjust. Nothing wrong with that. You can bring out luminance. Maybe you really want this kind of white yellowy area to show up. You know, you can bring the luminance of that up, and of course you could overdo it too, but you can see how it looks. It looks nice when you add a little bit to it. Kind of brings out the core, makes it look like it's really bright. Okay. Of course, when you do that, you're really starting to stretch all the curves too. You can zoom in and you'll start to get graininess between the two channels. So I typically don't come in here and mess with much of this. I really like to stay with just the basics and do as little as possible to make the image look good. I think we've done that here. It's one camera raw section. It looks pretty good. Let's apply that. Okay, so we've gone from that to that. I think that's a nice addition. Okay, so let's stamp this again. Control Alt Shift N and E, and we got a new layer. One thing I like to do next is do a high pass, and this is going to pick up really the sharp lines between elements. And Rosette's got some really good ones, which is these little black guys here. They really look good. We're going to try to make that look even better. And so what we're going to do is go to Filter, Other, and we're going to do a high pass on it. And you can see it does this little grayscale feature for us, and we can adjust the pixel size, okay, of what it is we want to select as the high pass. And we're trying to just pick up these real bright lines. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK there. You might look at that and say, well, that's not really that much. but it'll look good. So what we're going to do, we've got this image. We're going to use this as a mask and a layer. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to hit Control U. And for the hue, I'm just going to make it all black and white. So for saturation, just take it completely down to gray. Okay, now I've got this gray layer. What we're going to do is we're going to apply it as an overlay. And you can mess around with some of these. You know, you can do hard light, soft light. You can see what it does to the image. And you might say once you do that, well, it kind of ruins it. You know, I can turn it on and off, and I can see those hard lines really show up. But other areas out here, you'll be like, man, it added a terrible noise. It looks awful. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to kind of mask this out. So we're going to turn it on, and we're going to create a new masking layer. So come down here to your bottom tool. We make a mask out of it, and I open up the properties panel and I invert that, and so now this goes black, and essentially it's not applying to anything right now. And so we've got this layer. You can see I can turn it on and off. It doesn't do anything to our image. This is all black, and what we're going to do is we're going to grab our brush tool excuse me, and I'm going to go ahead and make a nice round brush, soft brush. I'm going to turn the opacity way down, the flow down to maybe 40%. And I'm going to have a white color, and what it's going to do is anything we paint with white is going to mask through that, and we'll see the overlay. And so I just use my bracket tools, and you can increase or decrease your brush. And I'm just going to go along, and I'm just going to start painting on some of these real dark structures. Okay, and we have the flow turned way down. You can see it's not really affecting hardly anything, but it does crispen up those little black guys. Okay. And so I'll go around and I'll touch these guys up. All this black stuff this black real dense nebula is kind of cool. I really like to enhance it and make it look, really as sharp as I can. And if you want to see what it looks like, just turn the eyeball on and off. And that might be hard to see on this video, but it really makes a nice sharp line on some of those elements. And you can do that for all these really sharp pieces. It's really going to bring out those edges. It's going to look like you added a bunch of clarity to the image. And we're not affecting anything out here, which is nice because it looks pretty good. It's nice and smooth, and it's got good signal. We can turn this on and off. Probably can't see it in the video, but it really is making some of these hard lines look good. So that is the hard pass. I like to do that. A high pass. It's the filter, other, and it's a high pass. And then you can go ahead and apply that. And you can see in this little image here, just the white areas are starting to show through. So once you're happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and stamp this again. So Control Alt Shift N and E, and now I've got a new layer. I like to go back sometimes and look at what we've done so far. There's what we started with. There's where we are now. I think it's looking better. Okay. And at this point, we've kind of gone through a few things. We've looked at how do we get those channels into our system. We edit each channel and we manipulate them to our liking so that they're nice and clean. We stretched it by using Camera Raw. There's lots of ways of stretching. Of course, you can come in here and hit Control M, and you can let me get back on my layer here. Okay, we can open up our levels this way, and we can go ahead and move levels and color balance. We talked about how we can go into camera raw, of course, in stretch. We can do it through the basic panel here, or we can actually go to curves and we can adjust red, green, blue curves. We can do really anything we want in here. There's several ways in Photoshop to do that kind of stuff. We looked at doing a high pass. We looked at how to really bring out this real sharp detail. At this point, let's say our nebula is pretty good. I mean, I don't mind that image right there. I think it looks pretty good. I think there's some artifacts in here. You can see this one. You know, I might go back to the original channels and take care of, but let's turn on the stars. And with narrowband, you know, especially in SHO, you'll start to see the stars turn really purple on you. And it's up to you if you like that effect or not. I'm going to go ahead and turn everything off except stars, and you can really see the purpleness here. And so I'm going to do the same thing with just my stars. I'm going to create a new duplicate layer just to show the difference here. So Control Alt Shift N and E. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run camera raw on just this, just the stars. So now I'm not messing with the nebula. And they've got a really neat tool in here called optics that let you get rid of that purple defringing. If you come in here on the purple amount, you can just slide that over and it takes all the purple away. Okay, you can slide it back on. You can see that's the effect. The optical effect, I guess you could say, of having all that hydrogen. Okay, but you can slide that off if you want, or on. You can also adjust the range at which it affects. Okay, so I'm going to take some of it away, not all of it. I kind of like some of the purple. You can see before it's really purple, and now it's not. That might be hard to see on video. Okay, that's a really good tool. You can also come in here to your basics even. Now these are, this is sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, so these aren't real RGB colored stars. And I'll show you in another video how to do RGB stars, which is really the same process we've done here, except you take a whole nother system of shots with RGB. You do the same exact system here, but you just copy them on top. In RGB stars, you really get the nice orange, bright red stars, and you get some of the bright blue stars that you see visually. I don't think the you know, when you do the narrowband, you don't get that kind of depth of color at all because you're taking such little slivers of light in these images. And so typically you're going to have either white or a little bit of purple or a little bit of green in your stars. That just is part of the effect of narrowband, and I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you look at some of the Hubble images, for example, you know, that come off of the great pillars of creation, they're extremely purple, and that's fine. I mean, that's whatever you feel comfortable with at this point. But there is a nice tool here. I do like this. Maybe I'll give it a little bit more purple. I kind of like some of that in some of these. I don't like them scalding purple, but we'll leave some of the main core ones with that little purple look. Okay, so this is our new stars. Okay, I'll turn on my nebula and kind of see what it looks like. One thing you're going to have to do with this new layer is turn it to a linear dodge. Okay, and that gets rid of the black. So there's the stars before. They were all purple. These are the stars now. Some of these look a little bit whiter. You can zoom in. I kind of like some of that purple there. Okay. So I think that's probably about what we'll do for this image. You know, we've got nice looking stars, I think. We've got the nebula and it came out bright in a Hubble color palette. Um, yeah, I think what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and create one final new layer with everything, and I'll just turn all my layers off. And so now I've just got this one layer with stars and with the nebula. You might run through maybe one more camera raw, just kind of touch up what you see. This lets you now adjust the curves with stars and with nebula. And so you can come in and you can really adjust tones. Maybe you want to bring it just a little bit bluer, or maybe just a tiny bit more red, and give it a little more contrast, and maybe just a little bit of clarity. Keep on pushing it. You can go a little bit of vibrance on the colors, a little bit of saturation. Okay, and let's take a look at before and after now. So it went from that to that. It's a pretty good difference. Even the stars look a little purpler and just a little bit brighter, a little more clear. Might jump over to detail and just get rid of just a little bit more in final noise. Of course, getting rid of noise with stars is always kind of risky. You can come out here and you actually start getting rid of all your stars. You can see all the little tiny ones starting to go away. So you got to be careful with it, of course. And we'll get rid of just a little bit of noise. I think that looks really good. Went from before to that. So that's a good minor improvement. I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And there's a final image. So that would be a complete narrowband sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, or an SHO Hubble color palette image done completely in Photoshop using star removal and some camera raw features. So it doesn't take long, and you get pretty good results. Of course, this is a great target to look at. So we're going to have some other videos. I want to show an actual RGB version. In fact, I have one right here. So this is actually just using RGB filters. You can see they're not quite as sharp, a little more fuzzy, but this is what you would see, with the human eye. This is the RGB scale, where you've got, sulfur and hydrogen and oxygen all mixing. There's no lines between the two. It's not cut in stone, but it gives you really kind of a neat color palette. Okay. We also have an RGB with SHO. So in this example, how do we do stars that are RGB to bring out some different colored stars along with our nebula, which we like in the Hubble color palette, for example. So I'm going to have several videos. Be sure to check those out if you have any questions, and we'll see you later. Thanks for watching.